He looked me in the eye and told me there was nothing left for me. My name is June Calloway, and Portland has a way of turning grief into fog. The Willamette runs like a gray ribbon through the city, and in those weeks after my mother's funeral, I walked its banks every evening. I watched rowers slice the water, their oars steady, their timing perfect. I wanted that rhythm. Instead, I had paperwork, stale condolences, and a brother who spoke like a locked door. Our mother, Eileen, had been a teacher who grew tomatoes in terracotta pots and kept her silverware wrapped in soft cloth. She had a habit of writing little notes and slipping them into cookbooks, so they surfaced years later, reassuring and practical. Take the pie out at 40 minutes. Call the plumber, not the neighbor. I expected a note like that in her will. Something that said, June, here is your part, small but yours. I did not expect my brother, Dean, to stand at the kitchen counter and tell me the estate was already settled. We were in our mother's house, the last afternoon of sorting. The table was covered with photo albums, birth certificates, warranty cards for appliances she no longer owned. Dean moved with loud efficiency, snapping lids on boxes, shaking the house with his energy. He always filled the silence before anyone else could speak. He had done it since we were kids. There was a new will, he said, putting the kettle on as if this were casual news. Mom redid it when your job went remote and you moved to a cheaper place. Said you were fine. Said I had the kids, the mortgage, the repairs. She left her savings to me. You can keep the terracotta. My throat ached as if I had swallowed accident glass. She wouldn't do that, I said, because it felt like praying. He poured 2 mugs. He handed me one and leaned against the counter, pretending tenderness. We were here, June. You were busy. People change their minds when the numbers change. I had not been absent. I had driven her to the doctor and listened to her talk about new recipes she wanted to try. We had set reminders for medications and written them in a notebook that still sat on the end table, a pen tucked into its coil. When she got tired, I brought her a blanket and she called me her calm girl. If she changed her will, she never told me. Dean went on. He had arranged everything. He had paid the probate fees. He had handled the bank. He was so good at handling things you forgot to check what his hands were doing. Do you have a copy? I asked, of this new will. It's filed, he said. Trust me, it's all proper. There are people who believe their own stories while they tell them. Dean was one of those people. He had always turned our childhood into a stage where he played the hero, fixing our parents' tired marriage, protecting me from imagined slights, rescuing the family from small disasters. He had a talent for standing on a chair and making it look like a pedestal. That night, I walked by the river and listened to the oars, their quiet entering and leaving. Beneath the noise of my brother's certainty, something else moved. Not anger, which arrives like a storm and passes with a hangover. Not pity either. It was a quieter thing. A question, then a promise to answer it. I would find out what had been written, and when. I would find the paper that told the truth. When I reached the Hawthorne Bridge, the lamps were coming on, one by one, a slow line of gold. I touched the cold rail and felt the first spark inside me catch. The days that followed looked normal from the outside. I returned to my apartment and my remote design work, 2 monitors holding my attention like a pair of patient hands. I made small edits for clients, adjusted margins, set brand colors, enlarged legal disclaimers. My job was to make other people's words sit straight. At night, my own words tilted. Neighbors left me foil pans with casseroles, and I wrote thank you notes with the same pen my mother had used. I brought home her terracotta pots and lined them on the windowsill, empty of tomato vines, waiting. Grief moved under everything like groundwater. You don't see it, but you feel your foundations shift. Dean called twice that week. He wanted to coordinate the sale of our mother's car. He wanted to know if I had found the quilting materials she promised to his wife. His voice was polished, the performance continuing. I listened and answered, and did not ask again about the will. He achieved a smile you could hear. We're a team, he said once. You and me. I continued to move through my days like a careful guest in my own life. I made tea. I walked by the river. I organized emails into folders. I looked for my mother in the ordinary places, her handwriting on a calendar, her perfume on the wool scarf she wore to the Saturday market. When I found her recipe for lemon bars, I baked them, partly to have the smell of her kitchen again. I cut a perfect square and could not swallow it. The world around me kept its own pace. Children in the building ran down the hall. A neighbor practiced scales on a trumpet at 5 each evening. The streetcar hummed past, steady and faithful. I started to collect these sounds like a list of things that kept their promises. At work, a client asked for a brochure about estate planning. I lined up icons for wills, trusts, and durable powers of attorney. I read their copy 3 times and felt something loosen. The brochure mentioned the probate court, public records, and the right of beneficiaries to be notified. Beneficiaries. The word landed with its own weight. I called the lawyer my mother had used years ago when she drafted her original will. Her name was Nancy Blair, and she had once eaten lemon bars at our kitchen table while my mother argued with herself about a charitable bequest. Nancy remembered me. "Your mother loved to make decisions slow," she said. Then she stuck to them. "I've been told there was a new will," I said. "I wasn't notified."
"Who told you?" she asked.
"My brother," I said, and I realized how bare that sounded. Nancy was quiet, as if she were not interested in the stage show. "I did not draft a new will," she said carefully. "I would have called you both. If a new document exists, it was done elsewhere." She explained what I had already read. Probate filings are public. Notices must be issued. Even in the tangle of grief, there are threads meant to lead you out. I thanked her and hung up. I looked at the terracotta pots in my window, lined like sentries. The light was wintry, a thin white ribbon laid across the sill. I put on my coat and went to the courthouse. I did not make an announcement. I did not tell Dean. I took a number in a corridor that smelled like old paper. I sat under fluorescents that made everyone look like they had not slept. When my turn came, I spoke in a soft voice to a clerk who had been asked every question already. "I'm looking for the probate file of June Calloway," I said. She typed my mother's name, and the record appeared with a simple cruelty. Filed 3 weeks before the funeral. Petition by personal representative, my brother's full name. Attached, a will. My stomach tightened, then steadied. I asked for copies. I paid the fee. I walked outside with a thin stack of paper that weighed more than I did. On the steps, I felt the vow form fully. Not loud, not righteous. I would read, I would understand, and I would answer on paper. The river kept moving, and so would I. I read the will in the quiet of my mother's old house, where I had gone to collect more boxes. The heat clicked on, then off, and the place carried its old rhythms. Dean had left behind the book of household maintenance, as if he believed a document could hold duty. I set the probate copies on the kitchen table and smoothed the stapled corner with my thumb. The will looked rushed, one of those template forms filled with names and blanks checked in the margin. The witness signatures were clean, but one was familiar in the wrong way. It belonged to a man who serviced the furnace, a friend of Dean's who drank beer on the porch and called me kid even when I was 36. The notary stamp was real. The date was jarring. It was signed on a day I had taken my mother to the clinic for an infusion, a day she had been drowsy and kind. The language left the bank accounts to Dean, the house to a trust for the benefit of Dean's minor children, and a small bequest to me that read almost like an apology, a checkbox ticked out of politeness. It left the terracotta pots to me, with a smiley face drawn beside the item in my mother's hand. There are small mercies buried in ugly drafts. My mother's handwriting had wandered onto that page, marking her attention, but the sentence structure elsewhere felt like a stranger. The older will, the one Nancy had drafted, had been balanced and thoughtful. This one had the shape of someone else's hurry. I needed to know more. I called Nancy back, and she agreed to meet. Her office smelled like lemon oil and comfortable chairs. She wore a navy sweater and silver earrings I remembered from years ago. She placed the new will on her desk and read in silence, tapping a pen against a legal pad. "I did not prepare this," she said, "and I'm not convinced your mother understood its full effect." "She was tired that week," I said. She asked me to read aloud to her. She closed her eyes between paragraphs. Nancy nodded. Capacity is not a mood, she said, but timing matters. So, do witnesses. One is a business associate of your brother's. That is not ideal. What should I do? I asked.
2 things, she said.
First, request the full probate packet, including affidavits. Second, gather proof of the timeline. Medical records, appointment logs, even your mother's phone. If there's a text, a note, anything that shows her state of mind, it helps. I thought of my mother's habit of leaving notes. I went back to the house and searched. I looked in cookbooks, under the phone stand, inside the folder labeled passwords, which had no passwords, and a drawing of a cat. In the back of her knitting basket, I found an envelope with my name. Inside, folded twice, was a bank statement and a list in her hand. Apples, flour, called June, talked to Nancy about the will. The date was 3 days after the signing of the new will. I held the paper lightly, as if it could vanish. The bank statement showed a transfer from a savings account to a cashier's check in an amount that matched her emergency fund. The memo field said consultation. The check had been delivered to a private legal service, a storefront near the strip mall with the donut shop. My mother had always overpaid for peace of mind. I went to the donut shop and then to the legal service. The receptionist wore a pale cardigan and spoke with the brittle tone of someone paid to say no. I asked for the file number. She refused, then softened when I slid the notarized copy across the desk.
1 moment, she said.
Waiting, I stared at a framed poster that offered affordable wills and divorce papers. A printer whirred behind the partition. The receptionist returned with a slimmer packet than I expected. It included the intake form filled out in my mother's shaky handwriting, but several portions were completed by an assistant, whose signature resembled my brother's wife's first name. The assistant had checked boxes that directed assets in a specific pattern. The witnesses were the furnace man and the assistant. On the sidewalk, I called Nancy. Bring it in, she said. And June, keep breathing. You're doing the right thing. That night, I went through my mother's phone. She had sent me a text the evening of the signing that I had not fully seen inside the storm of routines. It read, "Come by tomorrow. Honey, I want to talk about fairness." It was not a legal phrase, but it was my mother. I took a screenshot and emailed it to myself. I printed it on good paper. When I had all the pieces, I arranged them on the table like a designer laying out a page. Bank record, intake form, witness list, text message, appointment schedule, old will drafted by Nancy, new will from the storefront. Each item quiet by itself, but together they spoke. I felt my resolve become comfortable in my body, like a coat that fit. It would not be loud. It would be right. The courthouse was less cold the second time, or I was different. Nancy filed a petition to contest the new will on the narrow grounds she believed most solid. She asked the judge to consider capacity, influence, and the questionable witness arrangement. The clerk stamped our papers with that firm rectangular sound, and our argument joined the stack of other human struggles, all flattened to a case number. I did not broadcast anything. I did not warn Dean. I let process serve him, the way rain arrives whether or not you have an umbrella. He called me the same evening, his voice raw. "You filed against me," he said. "I filed for Mom," I answered. "For what she wanted." "You always think you know what people want," he said. "You hide it under quiet. It's still control." "I'm asking for the court to look," I said. "That's all." Silence stretched. Then he sighed the way our father used to after long days. "This is cruel," he said. "To the kids, to everyone." "Children survive grown-up honesty," I said. "They learn from it." Nancy advised me to keep conversation brief. She attended the hearing with me. Her presence was like a steady hand on the lower back, helping you up a step. The courtroom had wood paneling and a clock that ticked loudly. The judge wore the careful expression of someone who had heard all stories and knew none entirely. Dean arrived with a lawyer whose tie looked expensive and aggressive. My brother's mouth twitched in irritation, then settled into charm when he saw the judge's eyes on him. Testimony felt like walking across stones. The assistant from the storefront spoke, and her answers were thinner than paper. The furnace man said he knew my mother well enough, and the judge's eyebrow rose at the phrase. Nancy presented the text message about fairness, the intake form with boxes checked by someone else, the medical notes from that week. She kept her tone civil and low. Dean's lawyer tried to paint me as jealous and remote. I did not bristle. He asked, "Were you not living 30 minutes away, Miss Calloway?" "I was," I said. "And I visited 4 days a week." He pivoted. "You received terracotta pots. Do you dispute that bequest?" A flicker of laughter moved through the courtroom and died quickly. "I do not," I said. Nancy stood again. "Your Honor, we are not trying to turn grief into profit. We are trying to keep a teacher's last lessons intact." When she wrote the word fairness, she meant something plain. The judge asked a few questions that felt like checkpoints. He took everything under advisement. We waited in a bench hallway that smelled like coffee burned hours before. Dean stared at the floor, then at me, and then at the ceiling as if something there would help. "Why make this ugly?" he asked, in a voice he used when birthdays went wrong. "Ugliness doesn't happen when you name it," I said. "It happens when you hide it." A week later, an order arrived in the mail. The judge had voided the new will, citing procedural flaws and concerns about undue influence. Probate would proceed under the older will drafted by Nancy, which split the estate evenly after modest bequests and placed the house in a trust that allowed both of us to decide its fate. The order was stern, not dramatic. It did not punish. It corrected. I put on a sweater and walked to the river. The oars moved like punctuation marks. Back home, I printed the court document, the official one with the stamp and signature. I slipped it into a plain envelope and wrote my brother's address. I did not add a note. I did not underline a single line. When he called after receiving it, he did not shout. He sounded small. "You did this," he said. "The court did this," I answered. "I sent you the document." He was quiet for a long time. "What do you want me to say?" "You don't owe me words," I said. "But you owe Mom the truth." I heard him breathe in, unsteady, then lower the phone. In the stillness that followed, something settled. Justice had walked in and sat down at the table, not with a gavel's bang, but with a chair pulled out, a place set, a meal served evenly. In spring, I planted tomatoes in the terracotta pots. I pressed the soil with both hands, the way my mother had shown me when I was small. The seedlings stood like small green flags, each one a vote for the patient way. The window filled with light that had been withheld all winter, finally generous, and the room felt right-sized again. The estate closed slowly, as estates do. Nancy guided us through forms, clear and kind. The house became a trust asset, and we agreed to sell it. There was no ceremony when the key passed to a new couple who admired the wide kitchen and the sun on the back steps. I stood in the empty living room and laid my palm against the wall as if it had a pulse. Dean was there, his jaw set, his eyes shiny. He said very little. He helped carry the last box to my car. We did not become close. That would be a false promise. But we became accurate. He apologized in words so small they almost hid in the air, and I accepted them exactly as they were. He placed a hand on my shoulder, not to claim me, but to acknowledge the weight we had both carried, and he stepped back. On the day the sale closed, I returned to my apartment with a check that represented my half. It did not feel like a fortune. It felt like a level surface after miles of incline. I paid off my student loan. I put a portion in a savings account and labeled it good soil. I took a smaller piece and started a scholarship in my mother's name at the school where she taught. $200 each spring to a student who wrote about a sentence that changed them. The form was simple. The requirement was honesty. The tomatoes grew. I staked them as they climbed, tied them with soft cloth so they would not bruise. In the evenings, I carried a bowl to the window and picked the ripest ones. I sliced them into salads, shocked by their sweetness, and I shared the bowls with neighbors who had left me casseroles months before. I wrote real thank you notes this time, not the tidy ones that keep distance, but the messy kind that admit hunger and gratitude in the same line. Sometimes I walked by the river again and watched the rowers. I understood their rhythm better now, how silence between strokes is its own part of motion. On those walks, I let my mind remember the courtroom, the stamp of the order, the single moment when fairness turned from a wish into a sentence that would hold. I felt no triumph. I felt a steady relief, like a joint that had been reset. Dean called once in late summer to ask about a recipe. "Lemon bars," he said. "The kids are doing a bake sale."
"I know the one," I said.
40 minutes in the oven, no more.
He laughed, a small, clean sound. "She used to say that."
"I know," I said. We hung up without ceremony. Family is sometimes a bridge you cross without looking down. You grip the rail, you feel your feet, you keep going. On the scholarship application that fall, a girl wrote about a sentence from a book her grandmother loved. "We accept the love we think we deserve." She wrote how it made her braver in small ways. I folded the paper back into the envelope and felt my mother nod. I keep the court document in a folder in my desk. I do not open it often. It is not a trophy, it is a boundary. When fear tells me I am not allowed to ask for plain things, I touch that folder and remember that quiet is not synonymous with consent. Quiet can be the sound of building something that will last. On the anniversary of the day I walked into the courthouse, I watered the tomatoes and stood in the middle of my small living room. Morning light made a square on the rug. Dust floated in it like surprise. My hands were damp, and my breathing was easy. I did not need a stage or a speech or a victory lap. I needed the steady daily choice to keep my life straight on the page. If this story touched you, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more stories of quiet revenge.